When you think about how to possibly identify what businesses have been acquired by businesses and have a continuity of interest in them, that the appreciation and growth of the business can continue to be tax deferred until they're sold. There's a certain way to do this other than just going through corporate tax ID numbers, right? Mergers and acquisitions, their shareholders. How many public companies are no longer publicly traded companies from the last 40 years that were on an actual exchange that are no longer listed on exchange? Yes. Give me every company that is a publicly owned company that had been on from penny stocks, yes, to the Nasdaq, yes, to the New York Times. I'd like to know of all of those that had actual shareholder value where there were shareholders, they were publicly traded. Just focus on the publicly traded companies that are no longer traded. I'd like to know were they acquired? Yes. Were they bankrupted? Yes. Or did something else happen to them that I don't really have an explanation for? Let's say you had a large multi-billion dollar. Somebody's thinking of Y2K, and you remember the valuations in 1998, 99, and they had this whole new metric of the profitability of these various internet companies. I remember Y2K. I was there when the whole shit-a-rooney happened. But a lot of those dot-com businesses imploded and they sucked up billions upon billions of dollars in capital in the belief that they would be successful. And that happens all the time. But sometimes they sold themselves. And the new shareholders, right, didn't. Well, I'm thinking there's some missing money here, and it's difficult for you to conceptualize this, okay? Let's say 10 years ago, you were a big going concern and another corporation purchased you. Yes. You got delisted and absorbed into the corporation, and then the other corporation bankrupt, or somebody else bought them, and then they never realized any of that tax deferred value of the actual continuity of interest because there's potentially hundreds of billions of dollars that never actually. I know. This is a railroad, okay? Now there's model railroads, something I really do like. I like model railroads. I like little tiny things. Then there's some real railroads. Let's call Warren Buffett. You remember when you bought Burlington Northern Santa Fe approximately 10 years ago for maybe $15 billion? There's a continuity of interest of the shareholders that actually owned that railroad at the time of the purchase. Now, did you sell any part of that purchase where you realized the tax deferred value? Well, I'm sure Warren Buffett knows, okay? From the original purchase and all the property, employees, and everything of value that you got during that transaction. Yes. Was there any tax deferred taxation that was not realized? Warren. 19, the United States government authorized the breakup of Conrail, which at that time became profitable. CSX Corporate Norfolk, yes, today, oops, 500 miles. Now, I know that Berkshire Hathaway did invest in what could have been one of the largest transactions, engineering improvements. Why don't you get me all the railroads? Yes. I myself wanted to buy 200 of the smallest of them. Yes. And then get me all the railroads that had been purchased by somebody else over the last 40 years, where 20 years ago they had a huge amount of tax deferred, taxable valuation and income that they hadn't spent. Yeah. A lot of times people like to buy businesses that have a lot of assets. And when you think railroad, you think railroad tracks, don't you? You think locomotives? Yes. You think about that railroad cartoon. What's that guy's name? Yep. Now, this Railroad Retirement Board, United States government agency that administers a retirement pension plan. I emailed the Amtrak police and the railroad police about my rights being violated. In fact, I specifically contacted Burlington Northern because my father, Paul Douglas Budnick, yes, he was an employee there for quite a few years, over a decade. Yes, yes, yes. Broke his back carrying railroad ties. But I had heard that in my family, approximately, well, when the country got started, they had a difficult time talking to those that read the shit. A lot of giants on different locations throughout the nation. And my grandfather and my great grandfather found out that they could read the shit. He said, "Anywhere I shit, I own that." Now, I just wanted to know, does Burlington Northern know anything about Paul Douglas Budnick and him leaving a little sign everywhere saying, "This is my shit, don't forget it." Now, it could be that much of the actual assets of Burlington Northern belong to me. If my father had shit in different locations, could you call Warren? I'd like to know every person that has belonged to the United States Railroad Retirement Board and the pension system of all the railroad employees for the last 150 years. And every company that has done business as a railroad would have had the obligation, yes, since approximately 1935, to actually have to document that as an employer of any and all railroad employees, that they themselves had contributed to the actual retirement systems of the railroads. And then for every company that was publicly listed as a railroad, I'd like to know what they were worth at the time of the acquisition of the continuity of interest of the individuals that are interested.